Hello everybody and welcome to our new lesson, which is the political institutions. It's gonna be in chapter 12, section 3, political institutions. One will maybe tell me, by political institutions you mean the government. Yes, but before starting our lesson I would like to show you something. Our example will be Korea, North and South Korea. After World War II, Korea split into two halves or two parts, North Korea and South Korea. First of all, they were the same country by different kinds of government over there, or by different political institutions. They are not the same nowadays. After World War II, the Communists allied with the Soviet Union dominated North Korea. The Korean nationalists allied with the United States controlled South Korea. طيب. During this war, the Korean War, it lasted for only 3 years. Neither side was able to defeat the other. طيب. But nowadays, South Korea became one of the world's largest economies and the leading exporter of cars and personal electronics. Great economy, by the way, in South Korea over there. While the North Korea, fell under a totalitarian government and sank into poverty, because here they have a dictatorship, while on the other hand over there they have democracy. Here is the difference, and here is how the political institutions had the ability to control or to shape any nation. First of all, the power. For society to run smoothly, people must often act together for the common good. What's the common good? The benefits will go to all of the people, not for a single few, or not for few of them. So power will be how to control the behavior of others with or without their consent. Of course, in order or for the society to run smoothly, of course, people who are in charge must have some kind of power to control the behavior. So power is how to control the others with or without their consent. From the very beginning over there in the pre-industrial and in the industrial societies or in small societies, power was exercised through the family power. In more complex societies, they have devolved the family power to the state power. Nowadays, in the post-industrial and of our societies nowadays, we have some kind of political institutions for the exercise of power in the society. So a political institution will be the system of rules and norms that governs the distribution and the exercise of power in any given society. So from the very beginning, the family power had evolved to be a state power, then the state power became the political institutions. In fact, sociology had two main theories about the distribution of power in the society: the functionalists and the conflict theorists. The functionalists see the state as centering on the task of maintaining order in the society. So the function of any political institution from their own perspective is simply to maintain the social order in the society, while the conflict theorists will simply imply that any factor leads to social change. This will be their theory or their perspective. It's simply look at the way in which political institution affects the social change or can cause a social change. So power, while using it in the correct way, of course, it's legitimate. Legitimacy of power. For legitimacy of power, we have here two terms: legitimacy and power. Of course, power is simply how to control the behaviors of others, while legitimacy refers to whether those in power are viewed as having the right to control or govern the others, of course by using their power or their authority correctly, in a good way. So that the legitimate power is simply called authority. So authority is the legitimate power. We have three kinds of authority in different societies all over the world. We have the traditional, the rational, legal, and the charismatic. The traditional authority, of course, is clear from its name. The traditional authority is simply related to kings and queens. Simply the power is passed from a generation to another. While the rational, legal authority is simply based on rules and regulations. Here, people used to think that kings and queens have the divine right to rule or to govern, and they simply passed this belief from a generation to another. So the authority here will simply has a relationship with the person until his death, with the king or queen, I mean. For the rational legal authority is simply based on rules. By rules and regulations, I mean simply the elections, like those who are in the authority nowadays. Of course, in order to have or to obtain a political title or a political position, you must have some kind of elections, and people must simply vote for you or give you their vote. So the rational legal authority, the power here is related to the office, not to the person, not like the traditional authority. The traditional authority, the power is simply there will be a relationship with the person until his death. While here in the rational legal is simply the relationship will be tied to the office, not to the person. So simply if the person is changed or he has already left his office, so there is no more power with him. So we have the traditional authority, the rational, legal. The third one, the third kind of the authority will be the charismatic authority. Charismatic authority is simply based on some personal characteristics, like for example, like Guevara, like Gandhi, like for example Nelson Mandela, and so on, like Hitler. All over history we have a lot of charismatic leaders. So this is called charismatic authority. People will simply start to believe that they have some specific personal characteristic that is good to be followed. So we have three kinds of authority: traditional authority, rational, legal, and the charismatic authority. What's the opposite of power? The opposite of power will simply be coercion. So power is simply how to make the others simply change their behavior with or without their consent, while coercion is simply the power used through force and based on fear. And of course this is the tool for dictatorship, coercion. But all societies use coercion to an extent, but an illegitimate system has coercion as its main method of maintaining order. So you must follow the rules. The more that the government relies on coercion, the less stable the government will be. So the opposite of power will be coercion. According to sociology, we have three kinds of authority: traditional, rational, legal, and the charismatic. So for the traditional authority, power based on long-standing customs and traditions, like kings and queens. They simply passed the power or passed the authority from a generation to another. Authority lasts for the life of the leader until his death. Usually a child or another or other relative, by the way, will simply go, or the authority will simply go to him. The rational legal power based on formal rules and regulations, like in the election. The authority belongs to the office, not to the person, as long as he stays in his office. Each person holds power only for as long as he or she holds his office. The charismatic, the power was based on some special characteristics, and the authority depends on the people's belief in such a leader. So this will be for the three kinds of authority: traditional, rational, legal, and the last one, charismatic. According to sociology, we have two kinds of governments all over the world: democratic or authoritarianism. These are the two main methods used by most, or I can say all of the countries all over the world: democratic and authoritarianism. But before telling you the differences between the democratic and the authoritarianism, let me clear for you two definitions: the state and the government. And of course, we are talking here about the states. There is a difference between these two definitions. The state is the combined political structure of a society, such as the presidency, the Congress, and the Supreme Court on the United States. So all of them will simply be the states: presidency, Congress, and the Supreme Court. While the government is simply the people who direct the power of the state. So the government, I can say the people, the officials, who simply follow the direct power, who holds the direct power of the state. So the first type will be the democratic. In the democratic governments, by the way, power is exercised through the people. Those who are government take part in the governing process. So people will simply, the commoners, every single one who have the right to vote in the country, will simply vote, give his vote to a representative. This representative will simply shape the rules of this country. While on the other hand, we have some kind of constitutional monarchies, like in England. Like in England, by the way, the Queen simply had nothing to do with the exercise of power, or nothing to do with the policy of the nation, for example. So they still have a monarch, but the ultimate power simply rests with the elected officials. So they still have their kings or queens, but the power is simply exercised through the government. In order to achieve democracy in any country all over the world, we have four conditions of democracy: industrialization, access to information, limits on power, and some shared values. For the industrialization, most of the democratic societies, by the way, are industrialized, because simply Linsky, one of the famous sociologists, says that the educated urban population of industrial societies simply expect to vote in the elections, so they still have a vote and they are using it. Democracy requires well-informed voters. People have the right to know, the access to information. Democracies are strongest in societies where the public and the media have open access to information. And of course, in order to achieve democracy, they simply must put some limits to power. All governments exercise power, but in democracy there are clear limits placed on the government power, or they can simply make the different branches of the government inspect each other. So in order to make sure that they are not misusing their power. One way to do this is simply to spread the power among many groups in the government. In order to achieve democracy, there must be some kind of shared values among the people. Although the right to hold opposing views is the cornerstone of democracy, but some shared values will be something good in order to achieve democracy in any nation. So, 4 conditions to reach democracy. And democracy is simply the power that is exercised through the people. So we have democratic and authoritarianism. Let's see the second type of the government, authoritarianism. Authoritarianism is simply the power rests firmly with the state. However, this is not simply Weber's authority of legitimate power. Max Weber. Of course, we have the legitimate power. The legitimate power is simply power exercised through the country or through the state. But with authoritarianism, the power is simply with the state, not with the people. Not like the democratic systems. The power rests with the people. But here, simply with the state. And we have 4 kinds of the authoritarian systems all over the world. We have the absolute monarchy. Absolute monarchy, king or queen, they are simply doing whatever they want to do without following any rules. Absolute monarchy is simply an authoritarian system in which the hereditary ruler holds absolute power. He can do whatever he wanna do. Absolute monarchy. And this power, by the way, will last until his death. Dictatorship is an authoritarian system in which the power is simply in the hands of a single individual or a single dictator. So we have absolute monarchy and dictatorship. Junta. Junta is simply the authoritarian system in which a small group has seized the power from the previous one by using force. So junta is simply a group, here with a single individual or the single dictator. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is simply occurs when those in power exercise complete authority over the lives of individual citizens, and this will be the last form or the last step of the authoritarian system. So for the authoritarian systems we have absolute monarchy, dictatorship, junta, and totalitarianism. And I think this gonna be the last point in our lesson. So it's time for some questions. So the first question says, what are the 2 sociological views of politics? At the first slide, the functionalists and the conflicts. The functionalists will simply try to focus on the social orders or how to maintain the social order in the society. And here I'm talking, of course, about the governments. While the conflict theories will focus on how the political institutions bring some kind of social change. So we can say functionalist, social order, conflict, social change. See the next one. What type of authority is the most difficult to sustain from one leader to the next? Of course, while talking about authority, we have 3 kinds of authority. Do you remember them? Traditional, rational, legal, and charismatic. So I think the most difficult one to sustain from one leader to another will be charismatic, of course. What are the 2 basic types of governments all over the world?